Hello, patrons and Petruchios. My name is TBSky, and I put out a post on my Patreon about a week ago now, where I asked people to send me questions for a Q&A. And the reason I did that is because I kind of want to do more stuff for my Patreon supporters. I kind of feel bad that I don't do more stuff specifically for them, but I also don't want to do like exclusive content and lock that away from anyone. And so kind of squaring that circle is a little bit difficult, but I thought, okay, Q&As, that's a thing we can do, and it'll probably be like pretty easy to do, like a few questions. And as usual, I underestimated my audience, and I've got like something like 30, 40 questions sitting around here, and some of them are really like long and complicated and involved. And I've committed to doing all of them in a video, so this is going to be kind of like a podcasty video kind of thing. I'm going to grab some gameplay footage and let that run in the background, so if you want something to look at, I'm going to put the questions up on screen, along with like who they're from and stuff like that. But other than that, consider this as sort of a podcast experience, as it were. And let's dive right in with the first questions. 3 questions coming from Soulstep, who is one of my moderators over on the channel Discord. So thank you very much for that, dude, as well as for giving me money and then volunteering to work for me. That's... How the hell am I getting away with having this as a job? I don't know. Anyway, how are you doing today, Skyn, is the first question, and I guess the answer to that is mixed. Because, you know, there's been a death in the family recently, and there's the funeral coming up, and I haven't been sleeping very well recently. But also, on a professional, creative level, I've got a bunch of work lined up that I'm really excited about, and yeah, mixed. Mixed is the best I can tell you. Question 2. How were Merryweather's comics on Twitter able to create so much guilt over not using Internet Explorer anymore? Is it simply the sad and cute anime girl being sad and cute, or is there more to it psychologically? I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head there. Now, for those who don't know, Merryweather is an artist on Twitter who created a series of comics about Internet Explorer, personifying it as a cute anime girl, and then just basically having people be mean to her for being a garbage browser that nobody wants to use, and that made everybody feel bad and feel sad for poor Internet Explorer. And I think you hit the nail on the head there when you said it's because it's a sad and cute anime girl. Humans will pair bond with anything. Literally, like, anything that we can see a face in, we will pair bond with. Pet rocks used to be a thing, I will remind you. And like, you put googly eyes on a rock, and humans will form an emotional attachment to it. It's one of the most wonderful things about our species, and one of the most exploitable things about our species, and I think that's pretty much it. Like, they created a sad sack character whose primary role in life is to get beaten up on, and made them look sad about it and cute, and everybody goes, "Aw, I'm so sad for Internet Explorer now. We hurt that poor browser's feelings." Question 3. Have you gotten used to being a YouTuber as a job yet? Are you getting business cards? I kind of should. Shouldn't I? I should get business cards and say I'm an online video content producer or something like that. But on the other hand, the number of times where I've met people in real life where it wouldn't make sense to give them business cards is like 0. It's like, well, no, a few times maybe. That's not really something that happens to me very much. I guess I should, though. And being a YouTuber as a job, as I said already, is weird. It's weird that I get to get away with making money doing this. I don't understand how that happens, but I'm certainly not complaining, and I'm extremely happy that I get to do that. Next questions come from Moidera. What's your opinion on webcomics? Got any favorites that you're following, if any? And while we're on that, you got any more traditionally distributed comics that you're following, i.e. Saga or Headlopper or something like that? I mean, webcomics were how I entered internet content production in the first place. Like, that's like the first content I created for an online audience years and years ago was webcomics, and that's like, for a long time that was my bread and butter content production. And I've done comics. I've done a fantasy comic, I've done a high school comedy romance thing, and I've done a slice of life, and I've done, you know, penny arcade style gamer culture commentary things, and I've done magical girl webcomic, and the most successful thing I ever did was a webcomic about esports that I still keep meaning to getting back to doing a little bit more of. So yeah, that's been my entry point into online content creation, and I love webcomics. I've got a giant ass folder in my bookmarks that's just webcomics, and there's like 200 links to various sites in there with various webcomics that I enjoy. Yeah, my opinions on webcomics are it's the best thing that has ever happened to the medium of comics, and the traditional comics industry spent years attempting to strangle it in its bed, and it was incredibly stupid. And now, Facebook and Twitter and social media has joined that attempt to strangle it, and they're having substantially more success, and it's kind of awful. The trouble with making comics nowadays is if you put a JPEG online, or a PNG, or a GIF, or whatever, an image file online, then what the audience will do, inevitably, is they will save that image file to their computer, and then they will post it in full on social media without linking to your website. That's just the nature of sharing on the internet nowadays, is that there is simply no way to grab traffic from social media and bring it back to your website. It's basically impossible to do. And that's been sinking a lot of webcomics. That's been causing trouble for a lot of webcomics. Like, back in the day, there used to be a place called KeenSpot, which maybe it still exists, actually. I haven't been to that website in ages. It was called Keen Space originally, and then it was KeenSpot, and maybe it changed its name again, but essentially it was this collective of webcomics creators, who all of them had this central hub site from which you could access any of their webcomics, and they did a bunch of cross-promotional work. All of them had their own sites under the, hosted on the KeenSpot web servers, and they would sort of cross-promote with each other. Sometimes they do crossovers, all kinds of things, in order to drive traffic to each other's comics. And for a while, back when webcomics could support themselves on ad revenue, that was what people did, and that worked out very well. And in the modern era, unfortunately, not so much. The rise of Patreon has helped a lot more people to be able to try and start webcomics and make some money that way, but it's really slow going, and it's really hard to get people to pay for it. And then there's websites like Tapastic, which I distrust. I had a comic on there that ran for a while, and I had a bit of fun doing, and maybe I'll do some more pages of that sometime, although that's not really going to pay. But there are services like Tapastic and apps especially that are attempting to capitalize on a webcomics market by centralizing them all to a platform, and then charging users subscription fees for access to premium features on that platform, which I guess might work out in the long run, but who the hell knows? Webcomics as a format, I'm curious where they're going. And in terms of the ones I follow Sabrina Online, which is one of the oldest webcomics on the internet. It's been going since, I think, the late 90s sometime. Yeah, since 1996, it's been online. It's a furry webcomic. It's one of the OG furry webcomics, but I didn't really know that when I first discovered it. I just really like the art style of the dude who draws it. And that's been like a really old one, and it's still freaking updating every single month, which is damn impressive. XKCD, obviously. I do follow like the classic big ones. Like, I do follow Penny Arcade and PvP Online. Not with a lot of enthusiasm, but I do keep an eye on them. Also, Awkward Zombie, which is Katie Tiedrich's webcomic that has been running for ages and ages and ages, well, since 2006, I think, where she's been doing like comics about Smash Bros. And a lot of Nintendo game comics, and she's just got this lovely art style that I enjoy. So there's that. As for traditional comics, I don't have the money to buy any traditional comics nowadays. Occasionally, I'll buy some Disney comics, because sometimes they're really cheap in the supermarket, which is like a thing that happens in Europe, where we have this whole industry of especially Italian and Belgian and French comic artists creating Disney comics with Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse and Goofy and a whole bunch of minor Disney characters, a lot of whom were invented for especially the Italian comics market. I buy some of those sometimes because they genuinely have very good art a lot of the time and some really interesting stories. Not anything revolutionary, but some stories that are, for what they are, pretty interesting. And I follow Nurse Hitomi's Monster Infirmary, which is a manga by an artist called Sheiko, which is still, I've done a video about it on the channel somewhere, and it's still one of the most fascinating high school mangas I've ever read. And and I buy that on Kindle, pretty much, because I can't afford to buy physical edition. So that's about all I follow there. Next question is from Broken Flower. I had a serious question. How do you approach other artists to talk about projects you think they would enjoy working with you on? How have people approached you in the past, even? As a follow-up in the same nature, how do you consider if you want to be paid for said project upfront or not? That's a complicated question. I can talk for myself mostly, because every freelance artist have their own methods. There is no set method that you have to follow in order to work this kind of job. It's freelance. You negotiate your own rates with your clients, and it really depends on the relationship between you and the person that you are propositioning or being propositioned by. If I'm working for a corporate client, I want half of the money up front, half of the money when I'm done, and we work out a contract and we set out explicit terms for the length of our collaboration and the kind of job they want me to do and how much feedback they want to give, stuff like that. With a corporate client, you always want to have a contract. You always want to have paper on it. You always want to have a serious negotiation, because that's the only way to be safe. When you're dealing with collaborators who are other artists like you, then again, the relationship is the important part. Do you have a friendly relationship with this artist? Is this someone you know personally? Have you worked together on stuff before? Are they friends of yours? Do you trust each other? If there is that personal relationship, if there is that personal trust, just send a DM and start chatting like friends about the thing, and then work out a deal for how, payment or no payment would changing hands later on down the line. Then you can do that. If you're approaching someone as a stranger, someone who you don't know, money on the table first. That would be my rule of etiquette for that particular situation, because I get approached a lot, and so do a lot of my freelance artist friends who have even larger audiences that I do, about projects. Oh, we would like you to draw something for this project or write something for that project, and we get cold called essentially so many times, mostly in our emails, not on our telephones, but we get cold calls from people who want us to be part of some project all the time. And in the vast majority of cases, it's people asking us to work for free or for exposure because, oh, this would be really good for your portfolio, or whatever excuse they come up with. Usually there's no money on the table. And even if people offer to pay, it'll oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes it'll be some massive project. Someone who's like, I'm going to make an MMORPG and I want you to be the art director. And it's like, sure, I'm sure you want to do that, but until you put some money on my table, I'm not in a mood to consider your proposal serious. Unless you are a serious developer from a serious studio with a budget, no, I don't want to commit to anything until there's money on the table. And because we get so many just frivolous and silly propositions from people who don't really know what they're doing and who just oh, this artist is so cool, I want to work with them on a thing that I'm not going to think about, we quickly learn to be really skeptical and cynical about it and not really take anything seriously until there's money on the table. Once there's money on the table, I will do whatever work I'm paid to do, because that's my job. I will do the work that I am paid to do, and that's very much the same for most of my peers. Without money on the table, good luck getting us to talk to you, basically, because we just don't have time, and we can't entertain every proposal from someone who has a vague idea in their head of a thing they want to do, and we get so many of them, and it's really exhausting, and it sucks because it means we have to be hostile. It means we have to be, professional hostile, which is to be excessively polite, and then never follow up on anything if we don't think there's any money in it. And that's just the nature of the business. That's the nature of the job, which sucks. It's one of the worst things about being a freelancer, is having to have that dismissive attitude towards other people's creativity sometimes. But it's, money on the table, or else, or else we have to consider whether you're wasting our time and not deal with you, which I hate, but that's the way it is. Kairosh has a bunch of random questions. I hope that's fine. Of course it's fine. Your favorite color? Black. I know it's not a color, it's a contrast, but nonetheless, that's the one. Worst commission experience? Oh boy. Oh, I could tell you some stories if I wasn't under NDA. For a few of them, I could tell you some stories, but I mean, outside of the ones where I just didn't get paid, which are they're obviously the worst ones because you spend a bunch of time doing some work and then you don't get your money. That sucks. The worst commission experience I had within the last few years was I made a social media icon for someone with a League of Legends character on and stuff like that, and then someone else contacted me and said, hey, I saw that social media icon you did, could you do a similar one for me? And I was like, okay, a similar one, sure. Do you want a different character on it? It's like, no, the same character, and it needs to be similar, it just shouldn't be exactly the same. And so I made one that was similar, but not exactly the same, and they came back to me with could you make it just maybe a little bit more different? Then I made it a little bit more different, and then they said, could it be a little less, I want it to be a little bit more like the thing you made for the other guy, just not exactly the same. Then I made them a little bit more similar, and that was back and forth about 20 and 30 times before the commissioner finally decided that they were satisfied, and experiences like that are the worst. The worst experiences are when the commissioner has a very clear picture in their head of what they want. Like, they know exactly what they want, but they don't know how to communicate it to you. And this person just didn't know how to tell me what the hell it was that they wanted. They constantly gave me these vague instructions that did not guide me at all, and it was back and forth like 20 or 30 times. And the trouble was, I'd made the mistake of not getting paid up front, which I usually do for like really small commissions, like $10, $20, $30. I'll take that up front just to make sure that if a commissioner turns out to be really difficult, or they turn out like they want like 50 revisions on the thing, I can say, no, I've done the work that you paid for. If you want more revisions, I'm going to need more money. Like, just as a way to protect myself from situations like this. And I didn't do that with this one, so I had to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth until the commissioner was happy. And it turned a commission that should have taken a couple of hours into a commission that took a week. And oh my god, it was miserable. I hated it. And it was my own fault because I didn't establish a situation where I could set boundaries because I didn't get the money up front. But that was the worst one. Favorite food? I like a lot of food. Lasagna, I guess. The dumbest, cutest things your rats have ever done. Well, I keep rats as pets, by the way, if you didn't know that. You can see some of them over on my vlog channel in some of the videos. They do dumb shit every day. Like, they fall off of things, or they try to reach something and fall over on their back and they look like complete morons. That happens every day. But the cutest thing they've ever done was, I've been feeding them sour cream as a reward for doing what I want them to, like coming up to my hand or crawling up onto my shoulder, and then giving a little sour cream as a reward. And one time I cupped my hands underneath one of the rats so that they were sitting like on their butt in my hands, like a little person, kinda. And this a really fat rat, so it was just a big lump of fuzz and cuteness that just sat in my hand. And then I had a little bit of sour cream on my thumb, and they grabbed my thumb with their paws and started licking the sour cream off, and they just sat there like a tiny little, and it was the single most adorable thing I've ever seen in my life. So that would be that. If I was locked in a room for 24 hours and I could choose the room to be filled with either, would I rather spend the time there with furries or with gamers? With gamers, I assume you mean people who, if you ask them, will loudly identify themselves as gamers. Like, they will say, oh yeah, I'm a gamer. Like, gamer is my identity. It's who I am, a gamer. Like, that's my lifestyle, is I'm a gamer. And if I had to choose between that and furries, I would take furries every single time. Because everyone plays video games now. Like, everyone plays video games nowadays. In the same way that like, everybody reads, everybody listens to music, everybody sees movies. Those things are not meaningful as identifiers. Everybody plays video games. And so my experience has been that people who loudly, like, for whom it's important that they identify themselves as gamers, who care about their gamer cred, and like who place value on how difficult their video games are when they beat them and stuff like that, my experience is that they are some of the most tedious people on the face of the planet Earth. And the furry community has its own miserable outliers. I've met some of them, but I will take that over gamers any day. Any favorite cartoons, either kids or adults, that are newish and that you can recommend? Nothing you haven't heard of before, I think. Like, if we were talking cartoons as in Western cartoons, no. The Dragon Prince, Steven Universe, mostly stuff that most people already know about, and I don't really have any sort of obscure recommendations that nobody else could have thought of. Am I interested in online horror such as ARGs or unexplained videos? Generally not so much, no. I'm a wimp when it comes to horror. Well, that's not true. I have absolutely no, like, slasher movies and like blood and gore and like jump scare things and stuff like that have no effect on me whatsoever. I don't even give a shit. I don't care. But a well-told ghost story, something like Fatal Frame, the video game Fatal Frame, or Silent Hill, I cannot. If I play those games, I will be freaked out and looking over my shoulder for days. It gets into my head, and it stays there. So I generally don't seek out horror content, because it's just not kind of my thing. Daniel Haig asks, where do you see the channel in 5 years? What would you like to be able to do for yourself and the community you've built up that you don't have the means to do yet? I mean, being brutally honest, I don't know that this YouTube channel still exists in 5 years. It's stable for now, but YouTube is YouTube, and that stability can go away really quickly, really suddenly, for no reason, because YouTube changes something and all of a sudden your videos don't get views. Like, does the channel, if the channel still exists in 5 years, and if it's kept, like, growing at the slow rate that it's growing right now, and I have like maybe I'm lucky and I have like 80, 100,000 subscribers or something like that, I'll be very grateful, I'll be very happy, and I'll be very surprised, because it's really not a stable thing. Like, Patreon helps a lot in making this stuff more stable, but even that is not... YouTube is not a particularly good career option. Anyway, what would I like to be able to do for myself in the community? I mean, I've got a few ideas in terms of... Right now, I just want to have enough money to be able to pay my rent and my food, and maybe buy some clothes every once in a while, and gifts for my family at Christmas, which is not really something I'm able to do right now. I genuinely can't afford to buy a lot of presents for Christmas or birthdays, and like I said, I can't afford to buy comics or anything like that. So that would be, once we're there, like once we're past that point where like I'm stable and I can do normal people stuff and pay my student loans, like not in one go, but just like on a monthly basis, I can make my student loan payments and stuff like that. Once we're past that, one of the things I've wanted to do for a long time is hire an editor for my videos, so that they're not all so freaking rambly all the time, that I can have someone to edit them together and make them a bit nicer, especially the What's the Deal videos. That would be one thing. I'd like to pay my moderators on Discord. Like, they do volunteer work for me right now, while usually also paying me money, which is like... Again, I can't believe I'm getting away with that, but if the Patreon grows a little bit more, and I should probably make like some funding goals for those specific things, then I'd like to be able to pay them some money. And I don't know, I mean, maybe I'll do a thing where I commission people in the community to make stuff that I can analyze for the channel or something like that. If something I've sort of been thinking about in my head would be to take like a character from League of Legends or Overwatch or some popular video game and commission some artists from my community to do their own versions, and then compare and contrast them and use that as the basis for like a discussion about characters. And that would be really fucking epic. Whether that's ever something I'm going to be able to do, I don't know. I wouldn't mind doing it, but I'm gonna need to have like a lot more money on hand in order to be able to do something like that. And besides that, if I was making more money on Patreon, I would be spending more money on Patreon as well. I've got a lot of friends who are freelancers like me, who do work in a freelance capacity and who are struggling to make ends meet, and struggling to get by, and hustling for it every single month. And if I had more than I needed, and I could pass a little bit of it on to them to make them a little bit more safe and stable, then then that's pretty much what I do. Summer Bradshaw asks, what do you think about shipping in media? And is that something the author-developer should guide, plan, encourage, market for, or refuse to acknowledge altogether? I really feel Japan has its act together in at least providing subtle merch for shippers, if not making that the whole point of the show to begin with, but maybe that isn't something you would want to strive for. I mean, that's a complicated subject, but shipping basically is unavoidable. Like, if you go back to, like, Star Trek communities in the 1960s, like the original Star Trek, Kirk and Spock series on TV, and those fan communities, shipping was happening there already, especially lots of gay shipping as well, with Spock and Kirk having long, meaningful stares into each other's eyes. That was already happening, and that's something humans, like, people did it with Holmes and Watson back in Arthur Conan Doyle's day. They did shipping for the Sherlock Holmes stories and wrote poor Arthur Conan Doyle with their long-ass fan theories about who should get together and why and stuff like that, which is one of the reasons why he burned out on Sherlock Holmes so hard, because he was so frustrated with his audience who would not leave him alone about it. So I think shipping is inevitable, and you can't discourage it, you can't stop it from happening, like, so long as the characters are not, underage or anything, and not much you can do about it. And so what a lot of Japanese productions have decided is, okay, well, let's monetize that then. And that is where you get a lot of harem anime, first of all, where the whole point is to romantically fantasize about the protagonist hooking up with one character or another. And it's where you get a lot of the especially a lot of the sports animes have been diving into that kind of thing. And Free, which is one of my favorite sports anime in a long while, did a hell of a lot of queer baiting, which is something I'm not a huge fan of, but which, you know, it's whatever. They told a good emotional story. Like, there's a lot of that going on in a lot of stories where one of the main points, and that's my thing about it, is that that's not really fundamentally any different than a romance novel. Like, romance novels are also about having the heroine and, you know, the dashing, charming, handsome gentleman who comes into her life. But no, there's also the dark bad boy who's got like a bit of a dark side to him, and he's mysterious and weird. And which one shall she choose? And that's like the classic romantic three-way setup, that love triangle that's been, you know, working for 150 years. And that's, yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with it morally on the face of it. It's just a thing where you have to be mindful of the execution of the concept. And that's where you make the determination of whether it should be encouraged or discouraged. That's about as generic an answer as I can give to that question without getting into specifics. Dusk Fox asks, have you ever played Darkest Dungeon and or Don't Starve? If so, do you have any opinions about them? I've played both of those games, and for Don't Starve, I don't have much of an opinion about that game. Like, it's got a quirky aesthetic, which is nice, but I never found it very fun. I never really got into it, because the whole survival crafting thing it just didn't work for me, for whatever reason. It's not because the game's bad, it's just it never clicked with me. Darkest Dungeon, on the other hand, I played that for like a few hours, and then I quit in frustration. And part of that reason is because the game is actually really good at what it does. Darkest Dungeon is, specifically, it's about making you the villain of the story. And that was the thing I didn't realize when I was first playing it. When I was first playing it, I was approaching it like XCOM. Like, take care of your troops, and, you know, be careful where you send them, and be careful that they don't get hurt or they don't get killed, and invest heavily in their wellness and their their mental health and stuff like that, and slowly explore the labyrinth. And that's not what you're supposed to do in Darkest Dungeon. The systems of that game are set up to encourage you to be a monster, because the only thing in Darkest Dungeon, as I recall, that's free is recruiting more adventurers. You can always get more adventurers. You can always send more people into the meat grinder of the dungeon that you are exploring. And that's the kind of person that Darkest Dungeon wants you to be, which is a brilliant, brilliant execution of its game design and narrative, something I might want to talk about someday. But it was also the reason why I quit the game in frustration, because I couldn't play it the way I wanted to play it, which was as a good guy. Which just does not work very well in Darkest Dungeon, even under the best of circumstances. So, that's insofar as I have any opinions about Darkest Dungeon, that's it right now. Question 2, do you have any books, movies, or games with very strong nostalgic value? Oh, I mean, yes, literally anything from my childhood. I think probably the best one would be the Harry Potter books, because the first Harry Potter book I read it when I was 11. Like, at the absolute perfect possible time to read a Harry Potter book, it came into my life, and that became a really big deal for me. Also, the Lord of the Rings books, which I actually read before I read Harry Potter, something which frustrated my English teacher to no end, because she couldn't teach me anything when the rest of my classmates were still learning I am, you are, he, she, it is, hello, nice to meet you, my name is. Like, that was where they were at, and I was reading Lord of the Rings untranslated at the back of the class, which is one of the few things I allow myself to boast about, because holy shit did I take to English really quickly when I was a kid. Yeah. What's my favorite piece of animation from Riot? Oh boy, that's actually a really tough... I think actually the Rise cinematic from this year's Worlds would be the one I like the best. I think, just in terms of technical execution, in terms of the aesthetics, in terms of how it's put together, I really, really like that one. I think it's absolutely brilliant. Alison Harmaine, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, asks, my question is, how would you put into words the necessary differences in writing styles for games versus more traditional media like books and comics? I don't think there are necessary differences in writing style. Like, there's differences in format, in the sense that games tend to need like a lot of incidental dialogue, a lot of background dialogue, a hell of a lot of writing in the environment, whereas like a novel or a comic, you can have a central progressing narrative in a traditional storytelling format. With games, you tend to need to branch out a lot more, especially if there's dialogue options, especially if there's different, branching story paths and stuff like that. But you could write gothic horror in gaming as well as you could in a comic or a book. You could write anything you wanted in video games. What's true, though, is that a lot of the games industry doesn't try to do that because it's unsafe, and the games industry tends to default towards the cinematic language of movies for their writing in video games. They tend to default to a lot of the tropes that we see in filmmaking. That's something that's especially evident in games like Call of Duty, back when they used to have story campaigns. Your battlefields, which are just like the same fucking war movie over and over and over again. It's something that happens in like the major AAA releases, like even God of War. It's essentially written as a kind of Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings kind of riff, is very much what the writing there leans on. Where I would like to see games, like I would love to see a game actually written like a proper romance novel. That would be novel. Like outside of just the visual novels, that would be interesting. That would be fun. Eduardo Enriquez Care, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced that name as well, asks a few questions. The first one being, what's your favorite blood type? Asking for a friend. I'm partial to an O. It sort of depends on what I'm pairing it with. Like, it goes nice with a steak, but if we're doing vegetables, I might prefer an AB, chilled, not warmed up. Like, warmed up, it's just too much like drinking it from the source, and that's, I'm not a barbarian, so. Question 2, have you ever watched anything from the Monogatari series? Nope. I have not watched anything from the Monogatari series, and if Cell ever watches this video, I'm sure he's gonna get mad at me about it. Asking because it's one of the most original and well-written pieces of media ever. I'll take your word for that because I have not watched it. Have I watched Bojack Horseman? I've watched a few episodes of it, and then it became very clear that if I wanted to actually watch the rest of it, I would need to commit a lot of time. And more specifically, I would have to commit a lot of emotional availability, which I'm not always able to do. So that's on the back burner. That's something I'll catch up to eventually. Fourth question, what gives you hope? Consciousness does. Kim Anderson, a very old friend of mine, who's also one of the moderators on the Discord, so thank you very much for that, dude. Would you consider doing an art view on the Kung Fu Panda movies? Oh, wow, that's actually not a bad idea at all. That might be worth doing someday. It mostly depends on whether I can find a way to not get my channel copyright claimed all to hell, and then I would not mind at all doing a visual breakdown of the style and the visual flair of those movies, because those movies were freaking gorgeous. Like, people remember them for just being good Jack Black comedy films, but the visuals of the Kung Fu Panda movies are top tier. And I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, asks, do dogs have brains? Yes. What do you think of the works of Junji Ito? Have you considered reviewing horror thriller type stories as well? Junji Ito is a master of his craft. Like, he's an absolute master of the horror manga, and I adore his work. Like, horror manga, like what Junji Ito does, is one of the few types of horror media I will actively seek out, because he's just so damn good at what he does. He's brilliant. His work should clearly never be animated. That does not work out very well, but you should definitely, all of you should just go read Uzumaki right away. I thoroughly recommend that. What kind of music do you usually listen to in order to get the inspiration or muse in general for new stuff? Do you tend to just listen to what comes up, or do you have mainstays on your playlist? I don't listen to music for being creative. I really don't. I find that having music makes it harder for me to think. And it makes it harder for me to focus, because music demands my attention. I can't do the thing where it's running quietly in the background and sort of helping me. It just doesn't do that. Have you ever considered going to the GDC to attend a visual design panel? I mean, the GDC is in America, which is already pretty expensive on the travel expenses, and a ticket to the Game Developer Conference costs like $2,000. So no, I've not considered doing that, because there's literally no way in hell I would ever be able to afford it. If I had the opportunity to go, if I was invited and someone paid for my like travel expenses and for a ticket to get in and stuff like that, and I could get a visa, I would love to go and see whatever was there and attend whatever panels I could. But as a personal ambition, no, that's way too much money. I cannot justify it. Question 5, official TB Sky Minecraft server when? Oh god, never. I have trouble enough managing a Discord. I wouldn't know how to manage a Minecraft server, so unless someone's volunteering to do a lot of moderation work there, no, that's not going to be happening. Number 6, what is your biggest dream currently, and what are your intended steps towards that? If you already live your dream, you can ignore that question. I just want financial stability, man. I want to earn enough money that I can pay off my student loan payments, and I can buy food, and I can have clothes, and internet, and a place to live, and be safe, and not have to worry about it. I just want to be able to go out and eat dinner out maybe a couple of times a month without having to worry about the money. That's the dream right now, and my intended steps towards that is to just keep making videos. Just keep making as many as I possibly can, and doing commission work for people. I've got some nice big commissions coming up soon, hopefully, that'll help make me stable for a while, but that's the dream. That's why I'm doing this stuff. Irina Gutjar, and I'm probably mispronouncing that one. Is that Danish? Irina Gutjar? I don't know. What's your process to record a video? Do you write everything down that you want to say and then kind of move along the script, or do you have some important points written down but wing the rest? How do you pick the background music? Depends on the video. If it's a video essay, like the Blizzard is not your friend thing, then I'm going to have a script, and I'm going to read that script as a voiceover. Very specifically, I'm going to do multiple takes to get it right. Which I didn't quite do with the Blizzard is not your friend video. I got a little too emotional. I should probably have had some more takes on that. But that's, for those videos, and for, the Overlord video that I did a little while back, and the Riot League of Legends video, all of it was very carefully scripted out. For videos like the What's the Deal videos, I will usually take some notes, some sticky notes on my desktop, just to organize a few thoughts, and then I'll go by that. But mostly I end up winging it. I just grab a bunch of images, I grab a bunch of the lore, I sit down, I look at it, and then I do, usually about 10 takes where I just try to talk and improvise my way through it, essentially. Not that I don't consider my points and I don't think about it. I usually develop them over multiple failed takes. I will develop an idea that I'll then bring into the video itself. But mostly, yeah, I'm winging it. I'm talking off the top of my head. I'm doing a live improvisational critique, a criticism, which is just the format I've chosen to do for those videos. How do I pick the background music? I just have a playlist of a bunch of music I know will not get copyright claimed, and I use that. Mostly League of Legends and Overwatch music, and usually I've been pretty bad at not working out a playlist that would fit or suit the character I was talking about. That's something I'm trying to be a little bit more conscious of by having, creating a specific playlist of music that kind of fits the character I'm talking about, but I'm still kind of bad at it. Jacob Makeup, who has a really good name, asks, do you have any opinions on how Blizzard and or Riot handle queer characters? Should they be doing more, and if so, how? Oh boy, yeah. Yeah, I have some opinions on that. And it would take 4 hours for me to shout myself hoarse. Just shouting about all of the things that these damn companies should be doing better. But as a TLDR, Riot has 151 champions in their game. 150, 151, something like that. They have 0 queer characters. And no, Varys doesn't count because Varys is a Darken who is possessing the body of a gay man who has never been called gay in any of the official lore material, who's never been explicitly stated to be a gay man who has a male lover in any of the lore material. And those 2 gay men are dead, and Varys is possessing the corpse of one of them. So no, that doesn't count. They have 151 champions, 0 queer characters anywhere in the game, despite multiple efforts by their artists internally to get goddamn queer characters into the game, like Riot has said multiple times that they want to do. They keep saying, oh, we want to do it, we want to do it, we believe in queer rights, we believe in LGBT rights, we believe in inclusion, we definitely want to, but they've never done it. And they profit by changing their icons to rainbow icons during Pride Month and tweeting out promotional videos about, oh, we're so inclusive and we care so much about gay rights, but Not in their business, they don't, because companies, as I have said in a recent video, are not our friends. And no matter how much the people who work at Riot, and I know this for a fact, the people who work at Riot care very much about queer inclusion, but Riot the company is an amoral entity that does not. And this goes for Blizzard as well. They are leagues ahead of Riot in that they do have a queer character in the game, canonically. Good on them for that, but they too have been riding the, oh, we care so much about diversity train, virtue signaling, which is not a term I use lightly. They've been riding the diversity virtue signaling train really hard, and they have been really reluctant to follow up on it in any kind of meaningful way, because following up on it in a meaningful way might cost them something, and that's usually when the courage of companies like Riot and Blizzard tend to run out. Again, I'm not saying a word against the staff that works at those companies. All the people I know personally who work for those companies genuinely, truly, deeply care very deeply about queer inclusion, about having more diversity in their video games. They want to do it. All the artists do, all the people who write there do, but they are not allowed to for various reasons, because the company's interests come first, and the company's interests are not about inclusion or diversity or queer rights. The company's interests are making money off the appearance that they are promoting diversity, inclusion, queer rights, and all that other lovely, all those lovely progressive buzzwords that are completely meaningless until they're turned into genuine action. That's about as much as ranting as I'm going to do. I've deleted 5 takes on this question already because they descended into just angry shouting. So that's all I'm going to say for now. Plague Amon asks, if you could change something about a work of fiction you like, what would it be and what would you change? I mean, that's a tough one, because I've written like a bunch of fanfics in my day for stories that I like, where I tried to fix the stuff I thought was wrong with them. And picking a specific one, I guess I would change the Lord of the Rings books, to de-emphasize the divine blood right of kings when it comes to Aragorn, and maybe emphasize a little bit more characters like Eowyn and Arwen in the same. Like, essentially, I would make the same changes that the movies did to that universe, where in the movies Aragorn earns his right to kingship by, embracing courage, by overcoming his personal weakness, by sacrificing, by proving himself as a competent, actual leader who is worthy to lead the kingdoms, whereas in the books it's more like Aragorn is born to be a king, and that's why he's gonna be a king, because he has the king blood in him that makes him better at being kings than anyone else. And that's always been one of the weaker aspects of Lord of the Rings for me, especially since that's Sauron's whole thing is that he wants to claim dominion over Middle-earth because he believes that that is just his right to do that. Like, he has the will to power and he has the right to power because he's one of Eru Ilúvatar's angels, and that was the whole thing. The whole thing about Morgoth as the great enemy in the Silmarillion is that he's someone who goes, hey, I have the right to power as well. I have the right to make my own creation. I have the right to rebel against the word of Eru Ilúvatar, and for that he's punished. And so it would be nicer to me if Aragorn wasn't rewarded for just kind of naturally deserving power without having to earn it. So that would be a change I would make. Lenny Larkin asks, opinion on Nasus. He's a very good boy, and maybe I'll do a What's the Deal video about him sometime. And they also ask, when do you think the hype for League of Legends is going to die down and it'll become a dead game? That's a really good question. That's a really interesting question in a lot of ways, because StarCraft has been going for God knows how many years now and has remained relatively vital. Like, it's not the dominant esport anymore, but it's still not at all what you might call a dead game. League of Legends does seem to have peaked. Like, that it feels like that's happened. Like, League of Legends, like the meteoric rise where it just becomes more and more and more popular, and more people are playing it, and like it keeps getting more and more players seemingly out of nowhere. That period of its life as a game has ended, and now the question is, how much longevity does it have? And that's where Riot has actually been extremely smart about how they're doing League of Legends, because the League of Legends we have today isn't the League of Legends we had last year, or the year before that, or the year before that. Like, with the preseason and mid-season patches that they do, while they have never released League of Legends 2, progressively, over time, they have created, like, 2 or 3 full League of Legends sequels that have sort of arrived in pieces on our computers slowly over time, and that has done a lot to keep the game vital and alive and prevented it from becoming kind of stale and dead. And League of Legends would never have been able to survive in the same way that Smash Bros. Did, unfortunately. Like, that would just never have happened because it needs online servers and it can't rely on a small, hard core of enthusiasts to keep the scene alive. So that, you know, Riot have been very, very smart about keeping the game alive, and their investment into esports is also about that. It's about turning the game into more than just a video game, that it becomes a culture onto itself, that it becomes very entwined with the esports culture and stuff. They've been very smart about that. So if they keep being smart about it, like if their choices and their decisions keep working out well enough that the game doesn't, you know, die on the vine, we could still be having League of Legends 20 years from now. Like, I genuinely believe that's possible. Is it likely? Well, for that one, I don't know. MD asks, what audio recording equipment and software do you use? Well, I've got a Shure SM51 vocal microphone that I picked up on sale for next to nothing. It's a really, really high-quality vocal microphone that's just lovely quality. I've got a pop filter, a double pop filter that I put over the top of it, and I've got a AudioBox 22 VSL sound card that I plug into my computer with a USB cable, and that's the thing I record through. It's got, you know, it's got jack interface, it's got microphone interface, and it's got MIDI interface. For software, I use a program called Reaper to do all of my recording and sound editing. It's a lovely program. It's very powerful. It's perfectly effective, and that's usually the one I use. When I'm recording videos, however, I record through OBS. I don't record through Reaper. They also ask, any experience or interest in voice acting, past or present? I'd love to do some voice acting, but it's not something I'm going to be pursuing necessarily as a career. Like, if anyone has a project where they need a voice actor to do, like, a read through a script for a thing, or, like, whether it's a video game or a video or whatever, get in touch. If you're able to pay me, then I'd be happy to do it, but it's not a thing I'm pursuing actively. And finally, they ask, what is the proper way to introduce new terminology in a story if both its explanation and its omission are considered suboptimal? That's a really good question, and I wish I could give you a clear one-size-fits-all answer, but unfortunately, there isn't one, because writing is a science, and when I evaluate whether, introducing a piece of terminology is relevant to a story, I usually evaluate it in the context of the story itself. And you cite 2 stories in your question that I didn't read out loud, which is a Kali short story and Vladimir short story, where some of the characters there's some time spent establishing specific terminology in both of those stories that I didn't quite like. And one of the reasons why I don't like it in the short stories is that they're short stories. Like, if they establish a whole bunch of terminology, they will never ever have time to follow up on it or make that terminology meaningful within themselves. Like, they're going to be relying on future story content to build out the meanings of the terminology that they established. And I hate that. I really truly genuinely do not like that. I think it's a terrible way to do storytelling, which is why I always call it out in the short stories that Riot puts out. In a novel, though, the situation changes. If you've got, like, an ongoing series of stories that updates, like, on a weekly basis, and all of them are little short stories, then the situation changes. But unfortunately, the best answer I can give you is that it's contextual. Nino asks, I have 2 questions about 2 things. First, I remember that you did What's the Deal with Vygar not too long ago. You very briefly mentioned Final Fantasy IX, and I wanted to know what you thought about the game's main antagonist, Kuja, in terms of thematic design and personality. I would have to save that for a What's the Deal video sometime out in the future, because I genuinely do want to expand that to do some Final Fantasy characters and stuff like that as well. But in short, I think he's an interesting character. I think he plays with androgyny in some really interesting ways that the game could do a better job of expanding upon, because, like, that ties into the whole identity theme that's running underneath Sedan's story as well. The whole thing about being a created homunculus from an alternate dimension, and what does that do to your self-understanding when the place that you came from which is very much the theme of Final Fantasy IX, which is having a place that you come from, having a place that you belong and that you can return to. When that is taken away from you, how do you react to that? And that's where Zidane and Kuja present an interesting dichotomy on that. That's, like I said, that's a whole video that I'm going to have to do. But in short, like, I like it. There's some interesting stuff going on, even if it's not perfectly executed. The other question is, what do I think of the animation show called Wakfu? It's a standard adventure, let's explore and save the world kind of show, but what stands out to me is the style of animation, and I was curious on your opinion on it. I've seen some episodes of Wakfu, and in general, I think it's a really well-animated show. Like, I think it's really gorgeously done. It's a piece of French Euro anime. I'm not sure if it has a more or a less awkward term that's applied to it, but it's a part of a wave of animation coming especially out of Belgium and France that is taking a lot of inspiration from anime and including that in their particular expression of aesthetics. And Wakfu is a brilliant example of that style in action. I quite enjoy it. Dallas Gibson asks, "Hey there, TB. So I know you don't follow it extremely well, but I was wondering what your opinion on the new World of Warcraft lore is concerning this expansion. This would require a little bit of background research, but a lot has happened and a lot of people are pissed off about it. Curious where you stand." Yeah, I don't have the time to really dive. Like, I've tried to dive into World of Warcraft lore multiple times before, but every time I've spent like a dozen hours reading the wiki for that video game, like reading all of the different lore connections and all the stuff that happens to the characters, and I just can't. I can't parse it all. I can't get it all into my head. I can't really form a coherent, informed opinion on the totality of the lore that goes into that giant-ass ancient video game these days. What I will say about the current expansion, I completely understand the frustration that what World of Warcraft has done with Battle of Azeroth seems to have been a return to the lore state of Warcraft 1, where the Horde, the orcs, were just like the bad guys, and the humans were the good guys, and there really wasn't any complexity or any moral spectrum between them, which is like undoing a lot of the work that Warcraft 3 did to have that not happen, like to make the orcs a people onto themselves with their own culture and their own, like the Horde and the tragedy of the Horde and the demonic infection, then have Silvanas just kind of roll up and be unabashedly, completely and utterly evil. Like that is that it feels bad even for someone who doesn't follow World of Warcraft lore closely. And I know they're setting up the thing with Sourfang where he's gonna take back control and be the righteous leader of the Horde who will, restore peace with the Alliance or whatever. But I still think it's kind of cheap to just kind of pull a villain out of thin air. And I talked about that as well when I did the animation breakdown on the Silvana short, is that she's not a very compelling villain. She's just kind of evil. And she does evil things because she's evil, and she's angry that Arthas did her dirty that one time, even though he's been dead for ages now. I don't think, from my perspective as an outsider, it doesn't look very well put together. Summer Bradshaw with another question. Would Maneta's sexual harassment be validated if, in some sequel of MHA where they are adults, it's used as a background characterization as to why he's a villain? No. And there's a reason, but if the idea with Maneta being the loathsome little toad that he is that it's eventually going to act as the setup to explain why he turns into a villain down the line, that he's literally abusing his power right now, so why wouldn't he do it if he's older? If that's the setup, okay. But that setup is handled terribly. Like, he's not a good character. He's just not. The best I could say for him, when I did a video essay about his character trying to justify his place in the story, was that he serves as an indication, as a character who can serve as a reminder that there is a corruption in hero society that needs to be rooted out. That villains like Stain may have a point when they say, hey, actually, heroes, a lot of them are just these glory-hogging, fame-seeking assholes who should never ever be allowed to wield institutional power. That's Stain's ideology, and Maneta is a walking symbol that, you know what, maybe he's right. That's the best I can say about him. But the trouble is, Maneta makes every scene he's in worse. Like, he makes every scene he's in worse. He's not funny. He's not clever. He's not interesting. I don't want to see him. I don't want him to be part of the story. Every time he talks, he makes the scene worse. Every time he interacts with a character, he makes the situation worse. He has never improved on any storyline that he's been a part of in the My Hero Academia universe. And when that's true, and it certainly is for me, then I don't care what's done with him down the line. None of it justifies how badly handled, boring, sloppy, crappy, just the worst tropes, garbage-ass, lazy nonsense he's doing right now. You can't justify that down the line. If you want to write a character where this stuff is explored seriously, you have to start by doing it well from the beginning, and My Hero Academia hasn't. Manator is a boil, just a throbbing, pus-filled boil on the ass cheek of a series that could otherwise be brilliant. That's my honest opinion about the guy. Green Moriyama asks, what anime movies have you watched and enjoyed? Any you would be able to recommend in general to people? Any that you would recommend in the sense of the art or storytelling being intriguing? I'm afraid I can't give an interesting answer there, because I haven't watched a bunch of the more recent anime movies that have been like Your Name, I've heard very good things about, but I've never actually watched it for myself, and that's sort of, yeah, I just haven't gotten into that lately. So if I were to give a list of recommendations of anime movies, it would just be a long list of recommendations of Ghibli movies, more or less. If I were to give a recommendation, like Akira, watch Akira. It's a classic for a reason, and holy crap, it's so gorgeous. Like 30 years later, and it's still just absolutely brilliant. Is it 30 years now? I think it's a long time anyway. Aside from the young but old and other tropes you may have mentioned in previous videos, are there any other tropes in entertainment that gets on your case more than others? In general, I'm an advocate of the position that there's no such thing as a bad trope, there's only a bad execution on a trope. Like, any trope can be included, and if you handle it properly, if you acknowledge it, if you subvert it, if you play with it, if you play it straight but in an intelligent, interesting way, then there's no such thing as a bad trope. That being said, there are some tropes, like the young but old trope, that just, when they show up in a story, they're never about doing it. Like this, they're never about that. They're always about fan service. Like when you have the Born Sexy Yesterday character, which you can just Google and you'll find a video explaining that concept in detail. The character who is like sort of especially the woman who's like naive and sort of inexperienced in the world, but they are absolutely freaking gorgeous. They behave essentially like a child, but they are sexually available. They're never about exploring anything interesting about the character. Never. Manic Pixie Dream Girl is another one. Like, I've seen a few stories that do some interesting work subverting that trope, but when the trope is played straight, it's never interesting. It's just never been interesting to me, ever, in any of the stories that I've seen them. It's just never doing anything for me. Shadow Cat Inc. asks, Mystery Skulls? Yeah, I mean, literally the only thing I know about Mystery Skulls is that it's some animated videos that people keep telling me that they would like me to take a look at. I'm sure I will someday, but for the moment I've got a bunch of other stuff that I'm already doing, and that's gonna have to come first. Sometimes that's just the way it goes, sorry. Thais Petrolanda, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that terribly, asks, top 3 favorite philosophers. Also, any good book recommendations? I really can't do much for you on philosophers, I'm afraid. First of all, because I'm not especially well read in individual philosophers. I've never read any individual philosophy works. My education in philosophy has come primarily through my education in literature and my education in history, and where those thinkers tend to fit in there, and as well binging on philosophy tube videos and stuff like that. But I've never made a serious study of philosophy as a field, so I don't really have any favorite philosophers in that sense. Book recommendations, though, I can give you lots. Like, just pick up anything by Terry Pratchett or Neil Gaiman, and you'll be very happy, and you'll be a better person by the end of it. If you're looking for non-fiction, I can recommend The Columbian Exchange by Alfred W. Crosby, which is a really good historical work on the changes that happened to the world, the many interesting changes that happened to the world when the Americas and the old world of Europe were connected by trade networks, and all the goods and all the stuff that flowed between them and how it changed the world. If you want to make a serious study of it, you have to read more than just Crosby's work on it, but Crosby's work is a great place to start. There's also Jonathan Clement's A Brief History of the Samurai, which is a really, really good sort of short introduction to the samurai in Japanese history and how they've influenced like the progress of Japanese history from the very early days of the country's history up until the present day. Those are 2 really good non-fiction books. And then I read Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower recently, and I was taken away by it. I enjoyed that book really a great deal. So if you want some sci-fi from a really interesting perspective, then I recommend that one. Solitary Wave On asks, do you watch anime with subtitles? Because your voice sounds to me like Hochu Otsuka, and the only reason why I'm able to read that is because I googled what that name means when translated. A famous voice actor, and I hope more people acknowledge that. Yes, I do watch my anime with subtitles on usually. Very few. I watch Dragon Ball Z as the English dub, because I like it better than the Japanese original. That's one of the few instances where I do choose to watch the dub. But mostly I tend to watch series long before dubs are available for them, so with subtitles tends to be my default position, and I'm very happy that you like my voice. Thank you very much. Summer Bradshaw with another question. During the whole Goblin Slayer drama, were there any anime YouTubers you think had a good response? Did you watch the Mother's Basement thoughtful video on it? I did watch Mother's Basement's video on it, and I thought it was perfectly fine. Like, I thought it touched on a lot of the same stuff that I wanted to touch on, and... Goblin Slayer, Jesus Christ. I didn't watch any other videos about Goblin Slayer, really, because mostly I'm just not interested in wading into that garbage pile of a slap fight anymore. I'm gonna wait until Goblin Slayer has finished its current season, and then I'm gonna wait until the flames have cooled a little bit, and then maybe I will do a more comprehensive video essay about that series and about this universe as a whole. But for now, I'm washing my hands of it, because, I'm tired. Joseph Lee asks, what's your favorite game of all time? And do you prefer playing games with a good story behind it, or a game with fun mechanics and gameplay? So I'm not going to be able to give you satisfying answers to either of those questions, I think, because I don't know how I would gauge what my favorite game of all time is. Because the game that has affected me most profoundly on an emotional level is absolutely that game company's Journey, which I played on the PS3 when it originally came out there, and I had what could only be described as a transformative emotional experience going through that game, but I have only ever played through it once. On the other hand, I have been playing Transport Tycoon Deluxe for pretty much 20 years at this point, and I still enjoy playing it, and I don't know if that makes it my favorite game of all time, because it doesn't engage me emotionally very much on any level anymore, because it's essentially, I can play that game on autopilot. I barely engage with it anymore, but it's like coming back home to a warm, comfortable blanket that I can always put on. So it's like, I don't know the criteria by which I would judge a favorite. And it's the same thing about, do I prefer playing games with a good story or with fun mechanics and gameplay? It's like, I like both. Sometimes I'll play a game that just has a really great story. Like, I'll play a walking simulator. What Remains of Edith Finch is one of the games that I really, really want to play. And sometimes I want to play something that's just a damn good little tight package of fun mechanics and gameplay that's put together. I don't know how you would choose between them. L Dynamite asks, some while ago, Dan Olsen made a video about video hosting platforms and some of the failings of YouTube. Do you have any thoughts on what a better YouTube would look like? I mean, yeah, and that's also a topic that I'm mulling over in my head for maybe turning into a video essay, but YouTube needs better moderation tools. Like, that would be the first place I would start. Like, it also needs to stop screwing over its creators. It needs to stop demonetizing LGBTQ creators. It needs to stop demonetizing people who talk about, sex education. It needs to stop behaving like an absolute prick of a platform. It needs to stop putting the needs of its advertising partners and outside partners over the needs of its creators. It needs to stop trying to chase mainstream acceptance and mainstream profitability by, endlessly promoting television content on their damn online platform. They need to do a lot of things, but the main thing for me is moderation. The moderation tools on YouTube are, in short, absolute hot garbage. They're terrible, and it makes it completely and utterly impossible to effectively moderate a large community on YouTube. I can just barely do it at my current size. Like, if I spend, at least an hour or two a day dealing with the comments every single day, then I can keep on top of it, and I can make sure that my comments are a relatively pleasant place to go and be without being overwhelmed by, awful people screaming at you for having an opinion. but the moderation tools are garbage. Like, this should not take as much out of my day as it does. It shouldn't take as much time as it does. They are terrible. And if you want to turn YouTube into just a better place to be online, then moderation is where you have to start, I think. Owen Wastakachivit asks, "Greetings, Skyn. You seem to have a relatively wide range of knowledge. Are you just a curious internet dude like there's thankfully more and more of, or does some of your knowledge come from any studies you've made?" Well, I am just a curious internet dude. When I was a kid, I used to read the encyclopedia for fun. That was in the days before Wikipedia. Nowadays, of course, I don't do that anymore. I read Wikipedia for fun. And I have, as a result of just, I am a naturally curious person, and as a result of that, I have a wide range of knowledge about a wide range of subjects, although not necessarily a deep level of knowledge about a wide range of subjects. Like, I know a lot, I know a little about most things, but I don't necessarily know a lot about many things. Put it like that. I have done, like, a whole bunch of education as well. Like, good lord, I've spent most of my life being in education at this point. And I do have a bachelor's in history that I barely didn't finish. Like, I don't have the paper on it, but I did 3 years of history, and I did almost turn in my bachelor at the end of it, and then I went down with a depressive episode and never actually got to finish it. But I did get to finish my bachelor's degree in English, which, literature, linguistics, all that kind of good stuff. And I'm working on maybe doing a master's now. So I've got a wide range of knowledge from a wide range of places, and some highly specialized, deep knowledge about a few things, like, for instance, character design, visual design, illustration, and stuff like that, which I have acquired through experience and self-study. Owen also asks, "As a French gentleman, I have always been fascinated by North European countries like Denmark, who seem so much more on point than our so-called civilized country on matters like education, a catastrophe in France, environment, a catastrophe in France, or social achievements, a lesser catastrophe here than in the USA, but still bad." Okay, you have some trouble with the internal politics of your home country, I sense. So here's my question. How much am I biased? How much is Danish education, environmental policies, and societal policies really worth? I mean, oh, good lord, that's too wide of a question for me to answer honestly, but the thing I will tell you is that Denmark is a really small country with a very small population. Like, the entire population of Denmark can live several times over in Paris. Put it that way. We have oil wealth from the North Sea and like a lot of our naval territories. We have a lot of old wealth from the colonial days and from like the imperial days, where we made, as a nation, we made a lot of money selling slaves to other countries. Like, that was one of the things we did. So Denmark has its flaws, the same as anywhere else on Earth. That being said, like, we have a very long socialist tradition in the country. Like, we have a very long tradition of very strong unions, very strong socialist policies, a very strong welfare state. We give education away for free on the college level to anyone who qualifies for it by completing their high school degree. We have a really good track record on the environment because we're supplying more and more of our energy with wind power, which is something we're able to do because we have so much naval territory, which also helps us, with the oil wealth kind of thing. So I think we're doing well. Like, we're one of the happiest countries in the world, and you can't sneeze at that, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend like Denmark is perfect. Like, we have a lot of issues internally, same as any country always will have. Like, we have huge drug problems out in the provinces. We have a huge problem with rural areas being completely depopulated in favor of like massive population inflation in the cities, which is causing housing crises, especially for young people. And I mean, I've deleted like 6 or 7 takes on this question just because I keep spiraling into complicated political discussions of the many, many issues and problems that we do have here in Denmark. That I think if you look at it statistically, we are probably doing better than a lot of countries, but like all of the successes that we have, like, there's downsides and dark sides to all of them. There's a lot of social problems in Denmark as well. We're just on the luckier side of things. Max Landy asks, "I've been wondering a few things. How did you get into doing specifically comic art?" That was sort of a natural extension of my interests as a child. Like, the thing that got me drawing in the first place was reading Dragon Ball for the first time and being like, holy crap, let me in on that action, and then spending a lot of years trying to imitate, the manga style that I saw in Dragon Ball and Bleach and Naruto and stuff like that. So that being my influence, that's part of where my interest in sequential storytelling came from. But I've also always just been interested in telling stories. Like I've been a writer since the moment I could write. I was writing stories about stuff, and so combining that with my interest in art and comics, that was just natural. And yeah, I don't really have an origin story. It was just like it was just something I found interesting and fun to do, and then I kept doing it. They also ask, what's a few, maybe 3 games, movies, shows, other pieces of media you've had a surprisingly strong emotional reaction to? I don't know if I can name 3 off the top of my head, but Harry Potter had a huge influence on me when I was a kid. Absolutely no doubt about that whatsoever. As I mentioned previously, that game company's Journey also, that was the most powerful emotional experience I've ever had with a video game. And that one really... That one definitely got to me, and I guess Fantasia 2000, when Disney was trying to revive the idea of the concert film, there's the Firebird suite, and I don't know what it is about that particular piece of animation that always gets to me, but I cry at the end of it every single time, without fail, and it's not even that it's not a piece of media that I really should be crying at, but it gets me every single time. It's some combination of the music and the animation style. Every single time it gets me. They also ask, is there anything you feel like you should have had an emotional reaction to, but just didn't? I don't remember, because I didn't have an emotional reaction to it at the time. I'm having trouble thinking of anything in particular. I know it happens occasionally. Like, there's plenty of times when there's some piece of media that other people have been going completely bonkers for, and I've watched it and I've just been like, oh, well, guess that just doesn't do it for me. So, can't give you a specific example, but sure. And finally, they ask, I was also wondering how well the new God of War game portrayed Nordic mythology. Oh boy. Again, that's a topic I've kind of wanted to do a video essay on, but first I'd need a PS4 and a capture card so I could actually get the footage to make a video essay out of. But God of War's view of Norse mythology has very little to do with what Norse mythology actually was to the Norse. Let's put it that way. God of War's Norse mythology is about as accurate as the Norse mythology on display in Thor. I'll put it that way. It's just in the opposite direction, where Thor makes it all sci-fi magic and goofy. God of War takes it in the direction of being dark and angry and gritty and full of warriors and blood and killing and sadness and stuff like that, which is just not what Norse mythology is to me. Norse mythology to me is not all warrior culture and blood and, evil monsters fighting for the fate of the world. Norse mythology to me is... late at night, you hear a knock on the door, and outside there's a gruff, red-bearded man and his slippery companion, and they ask for lodging for the night, and in return for that, they will provide you with food, and they lead a giant goat into your hallway, and the red-bearded man kills the goat in one blow, and you cook the goat, and you eat it, and it tastes absolutely delicious, and the whole night, you sit around drinking and telling old stories, and the wiry, slippery guy, that's the red-bearded man's companion, shows off magic tricks and tells raunchy sex stories about adventures that they've been on, and come the morning, they all pack up, and they get back on their merry way. Maybe they leave you with a little token, and as they slip out of the door, you realize that your wallet is missing, and the slippery, wiry guy has taken it, and as they ride off on a goat cart into the night, thundering into the sky, you realize you just got duped by Thor and Loki. But it's kind of okay, because you got a really good story out of it. That's what Norse mythology is to me. Not the blood, not the warriors, not the monsters, not the apocalyptic Ragnarok and fighting for the fate of the world. Just people being people, doing people things, but doing them even more so. And Lenka asks me another question about Darkest Dungeon, but in this case they ask specifically about the aesthetic and art style. And yeah, Darkest Dungeon has that wonderful Mike Mignola sort of dark gothic western comic art thing going on, and a lot of Hellboy vibes I usually get out of of looking at that game. And clearly it's also taking a bunch of inspiration from like Dark Souls and just general gothic horror stuff. And yeah, the aesthetic of Darkest Dungeon is just good. It's just really good. Like, I don't have a lot of commentary or anything to really say about it. It's really solid, it's really well executed, and it looks gorgeous. I'm sorry I don't have anything more, critical or interesting to say, but that's my honest opinion. Matthias Valdemar Torndale asks, I was wondering, what is your favorite ever character design in any form of media, and why? And I regret to inform you that I don't have a meaningful answer to that question, because character design is contextual to the story and the context that it's involved in, and so I might, if I thought about it for a long time, be able to give you like my favorite villain design in a shonen battle manga, for example, like something like Dragon Ball, Naruto, Bleach. Like, I might be able to give you my favorite villain design from a story like that, my favorite monster design from a monster story or something like that. But just like my favorite character design ever, no. I don't have any way to make that judgment call because it's so contextual for me. It's so depends completely on the context that it's put into, like the way it's used in the story and the narrative, how well it ties in with the aesthetic of its world and all that stuff. So unfortunately, I don't have a meaningful answer to that question. They also ask, have you been watching any of the newly released anime this season, and if so, what are your favorites and your thoughts on them? I have been watching a bunch of the anime. I've been watching Boarding School Juliet, which I'm only about 3 episodes into right now, but it looks like a really fun, sweet little take on the high school romance with a little twist of William Shakespeare thrown in there that seemed to be manifesting in some rather interesting ways. It's something I might want to take a look at some point. I've also been watching SSS Gridman, rather, which I did a video essay about exploring some of the reasons why I think that's really cool. But it's a trigger anime and it's got a really cool visual style. Yagata Kimi no Naru, or Bloom Into You, which is a really cutesy little lesbian anime romance thing they've got going on there that I'm really interested to see where that goes. I've been watching Gaiko Shoten in Honda-san, which I'm definitely mispronouncing, which is the comedy anime about the booksellers, the bookseller dude who's also a skeleton, and he goes through all kinds of wacky mishaps dealing with customers and selling them boys love manga and stuff like that, and it's an absolute delight, and I love everything about it. I've also been watching an anime called Tsurune, which is a sports anime about archery. I think I brought that up in the answer to a previous question, but I can't actually remember, which is very slow and kind of cerebral and mostly concerned with dealing with the inner lives and the emotions of the characters that are in it, which I think is really quite interesting. Whew, and so we come to the end of a very long Q&A session. I hope you've all enjoyed listening to this, as I imagine most of you probably will be doing after a full hour of this thing. If you've enjoyed it, please do let me know down in the comments whether you'd like me to do something like this again. Whether you are a Patreon supporter or not, I'd like to hear your opinion about this, because I really want to find some kind of content I can make that rewards people for supporting my Patreon without, like, cutting out my regular viewers or creating content that is not interesting or valuable to my regular viewers. So I really hope for some feedback on this particular thing, if you can spare it. Other than that, like, if you want to support the Patreon and maybe get in on some of the stuff I'm going to be doing for my Patreon supporters in the future, well, you can head on over to Patreon and pledge whatever you want to, whatever you're able to. It's more than enough, because all of it is essentially a gift and a completely voluntary thing. Like, comment, subscribe, bell icon, yada yada, YouTube stuff. And if you haven't enjoyed this video, I think that's fair enough. I'm looking specifically for feedback, and negative feedback is a type of feedback as well. So if you haven't liked this video, feel free to use the dislike button. And if you want to do me a favor, go into the comments and tell me what you didn't like about it, so that maybe I can make it better in the future. Thank you very much for watching.